Hello and welcome to Huddersfield Town's preview show ahead of today's game against QPR. This is in association with Sportsbroker. To help us preview the match, I'm delighted to say I'm joined by former Huddersfield Town and QPR striker Kevin Gallen and, of course, Stephen Chicken from the Huddersfield Examiner. How are you both? You okay?
All good.
Yeah, good, thank you.
Excellent. Kevin, I'll start with you. QPR have had a bit of a resurgence, haven't they, in 2021?
Yeah. End of 2020, November, December, they were in a real bad form. Couldn't pick up any wins, and then the manager Warburton, he's pretty much pulled it round big time in 2021. Changed the system, gone from a 4-3-3 to a 3-5-2. And then brought in some really important players, especially Charlie Austin up front, and Stefan Johansson in midfield from Fulham has been excellent. So they've made a massive difference since the beginning of the year.
Yeah, the change of shape, Steve, is something that Carlos highlighted in his press conference.
He did, yeah. He talked about the fact that they'd made that change. Mark Warburton had obviously identified that with the personnel he had, and particularly the personnel he signed in the January window, that this was a better system for them. And it's a similar decision to the one that Town themselves have come to over the last couple of games. We've seen Carlos switch to a three at the back, a 3-5-2. We'd seen that before. We'd seen it do well against Middlesbrough in the second half, for instance. And he's used it in a slightly different way against Birmingham and Cardiff recently. So there's going to be a lot of impetus on the two sets of wing backs. They're going to be up and down all game. And you feel like that could be where the game is won and lost.
Has that been a key element, Kevin, at QPR, the strength from the flanks and getting balls into the likes of Charlie Austin?
Well, yeah, especially Todd Kane has really improved, and since the system changed. And just going back to the game at Huddersfield, when I think was it 2-0 to Huddersfield that day?
Yeah.
And I watched that game. That was one of QPR's poorest performances of the season. Huddersfield deservedly won that game, and but QPR are a different proposition, and you will see tomorrow. But yeah, definitely the balls that Charlie Austin thrives off crosses into the box. Charlie Austin's not going to run past the Huddersfield Town defenders. He just hasn't got the legs. He never really did. But in the box, if the right ball comes in, he can finish it. And a few goals have come from Todd Kane whipping the ball in, and Charlie Austin getting on the end of it. So that will be a concern for Huddersfield, is the supply line coming in from the right and picking up Charlie Austin.
It'd be a really interesting game, this, Steve, won't it? I mean, completely different, like Kevin said, to the one earlier this season at the John Smith Stadium. Both teams look almost completely different.
Yeah, very much so. I think QPR have been extremely streaky this season. They've had sort of good run, bad run, and now obviously on a really positive run again. I think it was definitely a routine win, similar to last season, and Town haven't had too many wins where it's just been a nice straightforward 2-0, no real dramas. But the QPR game was one of them, both last season and this season in the home game. But as you say, that the both sides have changed their style, both sides have changed their approach since that game, and you almost feel like both sides have had sort of points this season where you draw a line under everything and say, right, forget about what's happened before. It's about what happens now. I think you would have said Christmas was probably it for QPR when you look at when they made that change. I think they went to the three at the back from sort of Boxing Day onwards and haven't really deviated from it since. Towns is a bit more recent. They obviously, you would have looked at the new year with the run of form and said, well, that's when things change. But I think stylistically, we're looking at sort of 2 games ago for Town. It's still quite new to them. If they can do what they did against Cardiff, though, I think they sort of spent the Birmingham game learning to play this new style. And against Cardiff, they honed it further and put in a really, to me, positive performance. And it was a game they should have won. I mean, you've got to take your chances is the main takeaway from that. But it was a much improved performance, and they'll fancy themselves to get a win if they can replicate that performance again.
You mentioned it there, and teams in the Championship notoriously being quite streaky, quite inconsistent at times. From what we've seen from Huddersfield Town over the last 2 games, 2 successive draws, do you see this as a point now where we could we could kick on further and get some valuable points coming into the crunch end of the year?
You would hope so. I think you feel a lot. I certainly feel a lot better about the prospects of doing that than I would have done a couple of weeks ago. I think the derby and particularly the Preston games were quite dispirited, particularly coming off the back of that 4-1 win over Swansea, where this is the thing, we've had a few games since the new year where we would have said, okay, I can see them kicking on from here. The Bristol City game was one of them, because obviously they lost that game, but the second half they were so dominant, created so many chances. But then they got draws against Stoke and Luton, and the Stoke draw in particular was actually quite frustrating because Stoke were playing with 10 men for half the game. And then you had the Swansea win, and you think, okay, they're going to kick on from here, and then they put in two pretty poor performances against Derby and Preston, to be honest. So we have said this before, but they don't really have any other choice but to see that Cardiff game as a platform and something to build on, and keep doing the things they did against Cardiff, with the addition of putting the ball in the net.
Yeah, absolutely. And Kevin, I suppose in terms of QPR, though, be flying high in terms of confidence in the dressing room at the minute. Just 3 defeats in the last 12 games.
Yeah, I mean, like he said about the streaky QPR, went from really poor before Christmas to really good, then a little stumble a couple of weeks ago. Now beat Bristol City very comfortable last Saturday. Also a comfortable win on Tuesday against Wickham. And they'll be expecting, and the fans and the players, I'm sure, will be expecting another win against Huddersfield. But it's going to be tough. All the games in the Championship are tough. And what QPR really has improved on is not only with the system change, but they've improved in both boxes, where before they were playing well, pretty well, controlling games, but were conceding poor goals at the back and weren't scoring at the top. So they've improved massively in both boxes now to go with what they're doing in the middle third. And that's been the big change. And the goalkeeper as well, Seny Dieng, since he's come in, I think it was October, he's been outstanding, and he's been a real plus point for QPR.
That sounds familiar. The stuff at both ends, not clinical enough at one end and a bit too sloppy at the other. It's definitely a familiar story. You feel like this game could be one of those that you almost pick a scoreline out of a hat and you would say, well, that'd be about right.
Yeah, and I agree, because a lot of the games in the Championship, the wins and the losers or the draws are all just, they could flip. Whoever scores first, or whoever takes the chance, or the keeper makes a great save. And it's the fine margins are massive. I mean, QPR lost to Barnsley a couple of weeks ago, and all the fans were going, oh, what a poor performance. But Mowat hits a free kick in the top corner out of he probably won't do it again for the rest of the season. And then for the third goal, he shoots, and it goes through the keeper's legs. On another day, he saves that. That's the fine margins of, there wasn't not really much between the teams, but they got the goals at the right times. And be interesting to see what happens tomorrow, because there won't be much in the game. It's just who defends better and who takes their chances. And that's usually what happens in the Championship, from what I've been watching this season.
Yeah, absolutely. And a plus point on that, Steve, is the fact that we've got more options back. Bodies slowly starting to come back from injury, certainly in the defensive and midfield sections. And obviously, Yaya Sanogo, we saw him put in a good performance, albeit he missed a penalty against Cardiff, but a good all-round performance otherwise.
Yeah, I mean, you suddenly got about 427 central midfielders available to choose from. Doing the predicted lineup for this game was suddenly quite difficult. To be honest, it's been probably a bit too easy the last couple of months to try and sort of come up with at least something that's close to what we ended up with. But this time it was really, really difficult. Particularly picking a bench. I think I'd be surprised if Carlos made too many changes given the performance against Cardiff. I think, obviously, you might be watching this knowing the teams by the time you're watching it at home, but I would expect Hoggy would come in, and that might be a lot. But then picking the bench is then very difficult, because Danny Ward has been back in training, but do you given that you're already trying to manage Yaya Sanogo's minutes a bit, do you want another player whose minutes you have to manage, or do you stick with Kieran Phillips? Alex Vallejo has been playing really well, but it's difficult to find a place for him in the side with Jonathan Hogg back. Unfortunately, I've tried, but I just can't justify it. So you'd think he's going to be on the bench, but then Alex Pritchard's been back as well. So does he get on the bench? Does he fit the system? What does that mean for Scott High, for Dwayne Holmes? And then you've got at the back, obviously, Richard Stearman and Richard Keogh, and you would imagine Richard Stearman would probably be ahead of Richard Keogh normally, at least in my view. But Keogh had a really good game against Cardiff. So do you want to drop him? And it's suddenly nice, and Carlos said this in his presser, it's actually nice to have some tough decisions to make in a good way, rather than having to find a lineup through sort of a pack of injured players.
Well, let's go a bit further into the nuts and bolts of what you just said there, Steve. Obviously, the centre-back options are really interesting. Richard Stearman came back, and immediately, I don't know what you thought in the stands, but you could hear him. He was probably the only player on the pitch in terms of that game that you could hear consistently throughout. But Richard Keogh then performed excellently against Cardiff.
Yeah, he had a really good performance, in the middle of the back three. I think that's a nice balance in the back three there, with Romani on the right and Naby Sarr, who's keeping things a bit simpler on the left, and Richard Keogh, who has been, his aerial numbers have been really good since he came in. To be fair to him, he's up there alongside Richard Stearman, who previously had the best numbers. And I noticed when I was looking at this recently, Naby Sarr has upped his game in the air as well. Actually, he's obviously a big lad, but Richard Stearman used to be a bit above him in terms of the aerial duels won, but Naby's actually crept ahead of him recently. So you've got good options in the back three there. Plus, obviously, you've got, Romany Critchlow is not far behind. Tommy Elphick played 90 minutes for the B team as well. Yeah. He's going to be some way off making a start. Carlos wasn't sure if he's going to play championship football this season, but, he's on the road to recovery after a long time out. So, yeah, there's a lot of good options there.
Yeah, and whoever's chosen, Kevin, will have the difficult task of trying to look after Charlie Austin.
Yeah, I mean, I'm listening there. I didn't realise that Huddersfield had so many players. Reeled off a lot of names who, do you know what I mean? Bloody hell, they're not even playing, and like Pritchard and Stearman, and yeah, so you've got a big squad there, and sort of a lot of sort of well-known players. So I'm sort of surprised that you're sort of in the lower half of the table. But regarding Charlie Austin, yeah, I mean, it's one of those, he might not even touch the ball for 20 minutes, but then the ball comes in the box, and what he's really good at, he judges the flight of the ball very early. And he usually, another thing he does, he sort of, if the ball's coming in from the right, he sort of parks himself sort of on like the right back, behind the right side centre back in that little area. And if that ball does get over the right sided centre back, he's usually there to put it away. So yeah, it's difficult for the Huddersfield centre halves. They have to, if you look after Charlie Austin, he ain't going to outrun you. He's not going to outskill you, but you have to be on your toes with your concentration and make sure you know where he is. And that's why he can score goals, especially in the Championship, because he finds space in the box, and he's just got that knack to scoring goals. And he's a real key figure, I think, off the pitch as well. But also, since he's come back, he's given the fans, because he was a fan favourite before he left, and the club was like, the fans were like a bit worried about relegation in January, and then he just gave everyone, I know there's no fans in the stadiums, but he gave, like, on social media and everything, a massive boost. But I have to say, Stefan Johansson has been as good, if not even better, since he's come in January. And you'll see tomorrow, if he plays anything like he has been playing the last few games, you'll see what a really good player he is. I think he's still Norway's captain, and that sort of says a lot. Very good player, can pick a pass, very composed, confident on the ball, makes QPR tick. Very, very good player. So be interesting game. And I didn't realise Huddersfield, are you playing a 3-5-2 system?
Yeah, it's a 3-5-2 now, and it's just the last couple of games, and they've started keeping things a lot simpler. So you saw, in the first half of the season for the home game, you would have seen Town playing very possession based and keeping it on the floor and trying for turns of speed and things like that. But because of the injuries they've had and because of the run of form they've had, they've simplified it a lot the last couple of games. And to be honest, I think they needed to do that. I think they had to change something because it was evident after the Preston game that what they were trying wasn't really working. And Carlos has talked about he wants the players to feel comfortable doing what they're doing, and that means they're still getting the majority of the possession, don't get me wrong, but they are playing a bit more direct. They're a bit more no nonsense at the back. They're not sort of trying to play out as much. And they've got Yaya Sanogo up top now, who's, and Adam prompted me on him earlier. I didn't really talk about him, but he did have a really good performance on Friday. It's a shame about that penalty that he missed on his first start for Town. But he gives Town something different, which is what we've sort of been crying out for all season, is to have a plan B. And I think, Sanogo could make a big difference. I wrote last week, even if he were to go the whole rest of the season without scoring a goal, and you would hope he'd get a couple, but even if he were to go the rest of the season without scoring a goal, you could see that he could be a success because of the way he gets other players around him playing. I thought Lewis O'Brien in particular benefited from the space that Sanogo was making last week, coming in from midfield. I thought second half Lewis was excellent, so hopefully we'll see more of that.
Yeah, I was just to say, so it's going to be a matchup, but QPR has sort of deviated from actually playing two main centre forwards in the last two games. They've sort of they're playing like a 3-6-1, where they've got like two number 10s behind Charlie Austin, where before it was a number 10 behind the two central strikers. So they've got Chris Willock's come in, and he's done really well in the last two games, and he's not really a centre forward, but he'll be roaming around and he'll end up on either wing, and Ilias Chair is very similar. And so it's a little bit different, but interesting to see what happens with the fullbacks, because now the wing backs, they're now going to be basically 1v1, and who's going to get the better of each other.
We know all about Chris Willock. We had him on loan last season. How's he been doing at QPR? He's been playing a bit everywhere, hasn't he?
Yeah, well, he hasn't really started many games until the last couple, but since the turn of the year, he's been coming on sub, and he's actually done really well when he's come on for the last 15, 20 minutes and made an impact and scored a couple of goals. He made the goal on Tuesday. Really good assist to pick the ball up on the right-hand side and went past, and it was going in, and Ilias Chair nicked the goal off him, but I don't blame him for doing that.
So didn't Steve Mounier do that to Willock as well for us last year?
Yeah, Swansea away. I think.
I'm still not convinced he got a touch on that, but never mind.
He's done. He's the last two games he's done well. He hasn't really played. He hasn't really started that many games, so he's done well. We'll see tomorrow. He's a big. He'll be probably obviously up for it because he's playing against his former teammates. So you can have a look for yourselves.
Yeah, that's a worry, because we saw how he played against West Brom on the penultimate day last year, and he had a brilliant sort of one of the best sort of 30 minutes we'd seen in a Town shirt. So hopefully he doesn't enjoy playing against Town quite so much.
Yeah, Jonathan Hogg might have his work cut out if he is back in a starting lineup. I suppose, Steve, we spoke about him and Alex Vallejo and whether they can play together, whether they can't. That Swansea game in particular, Alex Vallejo played in a back three, didn't he? On the right-hand side, they seemed to be able to create a lot of space for each other, allowed us to dominate the ball a little bit more. I wonder whether that's an option, but then I suppose you go back to the centre halves and the whole topic around them. It's like who then do you rest or do you drop?
Yeah, I mean, Carlos obviously, will have his own view on this. For me personally, I think the three at the back has worked best this season, generally speaking, when it's been three out-and-out defenders rather than dropping Huggy or Alex Vallejo back in there. But I guess it depends how you're going to play, because if you think there's going to be a lot of spacing behind the wing backs and you want to get the ball out to the wings quickly on the counter-attack, then there's no better person to be putting those balls forward than Alex Vallejo. We know he's got incredible passing range and can, you'd count on him if you were playing a game of football golf, I think you'd want him as your doubles partner, wouldn't you? Can you play doubles in golf? I don't know about golf, but no, he's. I can see the utility for him, and I think there's. I would be surprised if he didn't get on at some point. I think the other sort of thing he brings is he's able to. If you had a lead, for instance, I think he's able to help you sort of protect that lead by staying in control of the game. So I think it's sort of assessing the game situation and what's happening, because there are times when you need to ride out a storm and you do want the 3 proper centre backs on there, and you want Hoggy in there fighting away because it's a battle. And then there's other situations where you maybe want a bit more silk and a bit more control, and you just want to stay on the ball, and then maybe you want Vallejo more.
Yeah, it's certainly going to be an interesting decision for Carlos Corberan to make. And another important thing into this game, Steve, is trying to correct our away form. It's been difficult on the road.
Yeah, Halloween was the last win away from home, away to Millwall, and they made it pretty easy for Town on the day. They played well, to be fair. It was one of sort of the, I think at that point of the season, as close as we've seen to a complete 90 minutes. I think I would probably add Cardiff to that, to be honest, in terms of what they were doing off the ball in particular. Yeah, it's something they need to fix. I think we're sort of, hopefully we're at a point of the season where we went through that run in sort of January and February where it was constantly bringing up the records, and it was like, it's the first time they've failed to win this many games since such and such a date. It was always the start of last season. And now hopefully we are getting into the stage of the season where we're doing what we did against Cardiff, where it's, that was the first clean sheet since just before Christmas. Now, if they get another clean sheet, it will actually be the previous away clean sheet was 3 days before that, was the 16th of December, away to Coventry.
Yeah.
So, obviously if you get a clean sheet, you're obviously guaranteed at least 1 point. I think a point would be decent out of this game, actually. I was thinking away game, a point is good unless you're playing sort of one of the bottom 3 teams. But a win would be really nice, just psychologically, and more importantly, just in terms of what it does to the league table.
Yeah, we spoke about form at home and away quite a lot on these shows, Kevin. But as a former player yourself, when you've gone on a long streak where you're struggling away from home, what's that like, and how difficult is that mentally to kind of get over?
Yeah, it's difficult, because if you haven't won a game from home, and you're playing and you're doing all right and you're in the game, and then you go 1-0 down, it's like there's a bit of a feeling in your head where it's like, oh, here we go again, it's happening again. And it takes someone to break that sort of that feeling, or that duck, or an individual to grab the game by the scruff of the neck and do something, to make a goal, score a goal, or whatever, out of the blue. And all it does, it just takes one moment in the game by someone, and the whole mentality changes. And you're like, you go 1-0 up, you're like, come on, we can hold on to this and dig in. And then the relief after the final whistle is like, yeah, can do that again. We can do that. If we do that same thing, what we did today, next week we can win again. And it is difficult, but it's very hard to put your finger on how it happens. It just sort of happens. But like I said, I think it just takes an individual to just do something really good, take the game by the scruff of the neck, and change that mentality.
Yeah, I guess if we're talking about taking the game by the scruff of the neck, it helps, Steve, to have those leaders coming back too.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about likes of Richard Keogh, Richard Stearman, Jonathan Hogg, and Lewis O'Brien's obviously been wearing the captain's armband recently as well. So yeah, having them back is going to be a massive thing potentially, because it's not even, I think you need sort of your maverick characters to do what Kevin said, and sort of, taking the game and coming up with a surprise. But I think you need your leaders to then dig in and get you through it after you've done that kind of thing. I think we've seen Town have generally been poor at protecting leads this season. There's no getting away from that. And having those experienced players on the pitch, and that game management is a phrase we always hear, could be really, really important.
Yeah, absolutely. And before we go, Kevin, obviously, you had a brief spell at Huddersfield Town. Just talk us through your memories from that period and your time at the club.
Yeah, it was sort of difficult. Steve Bruce brought me in, and we had a really good team, I thought, at the time. And it just don't know what happened. It didn't click. And unfortunately, Steve Bruce, who I really like playing for, got injured and got sacked. But we went to Sheffield Wednesday, I think, on the second game of the season, and I think we went 3-0 up after half an hour, and we was looking pretty good. And then that game, I scored. I think Clyde Weinhold might have scored, and so I can't remember something else, but it's a long time ago. And after that game, Clyde had that really bad accident where he had a car crash, and I don't know, he really didn't really play again. Like he had a really bad accident. I got injured in that game and pulled my hamstring, and I was out now for 5 or 6 weeks. So we were both starting up front together, and it was just a lot of bad luck. Lou Macari then came in, and we sort of had a resurgence and brought Boovy back, and we had a little resurgence. And I still can't believe we were staying up until the last minute. And I think Dougie Freeman scored for Crystal Palace at Stockport in the last minute, and we got relegated. I couldn't believe it, really. We shouldn't have gone down. We had a better team than that, and unfortunately we went down. And I was obviously gutted about that. But other than that, I really enjoyed my time. Met some good lads, some really good lads there. Jamie Vincent, Simon Bulbury, Craig Armstrong, Kenny Irons, really, really good. Martin Smith, good lads, good players. All of them. Do you know what? It was really good. I really enjoyed it. Other than the relegation, it's a lot different for me. It was the first time I'd left London, and something different. And it was nice, to play for another team, but also just a little bit of a different culture shock for me from West London and moving up to Huddersfield. I lived in Ossett for a year, and it was. I had a good time. I really did. Other than the relegation, met some good people. So I enjoyed it. It was I look back as a really good memory for me.
No, that's really good to hear. Kevin, Steve, thank you very much for joining us. Town fans, you can watch the game against QPR on iFollow HTAFC if you purchase a match pass for £10. Thank you for watching.